All right. So, welcome to this week's workshop, Figma workshop series. Today we're going to be going over variables. As always, my name is Dylan Nguyen. I was a UX researcher and designer at Geico. During my time at UTD, I was part of the UX club as an officer, and I have been one of your instructors for this series. I'll allow my co-instructor to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Sanjana Venkat. I also went to UTD and I was also in UX Club with Villain, and I currently work at JP Morgan Chase.
All right. So just to zoom out a little bit, today we're going to be going over variables, like I said. This is going to be the last course where we have content to show you guys. Next week, we're going to be having an extended Q&A session at the same time as we always have our class. So that'll be a chance for you to come in, ask any questions you might have about any of the content we've gone over or any other Figma questions. You can also ask about the UX industry in general. You can ask two people who have worked in it. And then if you have any projects that you're working on and you want an extra set of eyes on that, feel free to bring that in and show off to your peers. We'll also probably be doing breakout rooms so you guys can have a bit more individualized feedback on everything. So last week, we went over style guides. We went over what a style guide is, how and why we should use it. We talked about how to make the components of a style guide in Figma specifically. And then we talked about how to implement those components within a design. And then in order to talk about all of that, we talked a little bit about color variables. At the end of course, everyone who participated had a little design made up for their favorite artist using style guides and the styles within Figma, as well as color variables in order to make a light mode and a dark mode. So this week, we're going to be talking about variables. Before we get into all of the cool stuff you can do with variables and prototyping in Figma, let's kind of try to understand what a variable is. For people who come from CS backgrounds, like the majority of UTD, it feels like, you probably know what a variable is. You probably have worked with them and you understand how they function. And that's great because in Figma, they function largely in the same way. Um, for people who are not from that background, no worries, because variables are actually pretty simple to understand. In fact, my definition for them for this workshop series is going to be just 3 words. It's going to be a named value location. So let's break that down a little bit. The first part, named. A variable is going to have a specific name. You're going to be able to refer to it using its name. And if you call it by its name, everyone should understand exactly which variable you're talking about. No two variables are going to be named the same, and you're going to know exactly what someone else is talking about if they identify it using its name. Each variable will contain a data point. It'll have a value, right? Within Figma, this value can be a few different things, right? So each variable can contain either a number, right? This is any number you can think of. For people from CS backgrounds, this is an integer or a decimal, either or. It can contain a string, so that's just a series of characters that you can type out that can be contained within a variable. It can also contain a color, so any color that's identifiable with a hex code can be contained within a variable. And then finally, within Figma, it can be a Boolean value. So that just means it can be true or false. Um, Figma is constantly adding new features, and they're going to be adding more data types to variables, but those are the current ones that are available. Next, it is a location. Now, this explanation might be different depending on who's teaching you, but the way I would like you to understand variables for Figma and for prototyping is that it is a location. The variable is not the actual value. It is just a thing that holds the value, right? It's the container, not the contents. Now, if you've already worked with variables, all that probably made a lot of sense. But if not, here is a very easy to understand visual for you to follow, right? So let's imagine you have a storage closet. And in the storage closet, you have a bunch of boxes. Each of these boxes you can think of as a variable, right? So each of the boxes will have a name, they'll have a label, right? Let's say your parents ask you to go grab the action figure box. You know exactly which one that is because it's labeled and you can go and grab that box. You're not going to grab the box that says houseplants. You're not going to grab the box that says like furniture. You're going to grab the one that says action figure because it's very specifically labeled. Now, all of the boxes also have a value. They have something inside of them, right? Um, in this case, all the boxes can only contain one item. It's kind of weird, but that's just how we're gonna roll with it. But each box contains a value. And not only that, but there are different types of boxes, right? So maybe your cardboard boxes contain like toys and things of that nature. There might also be boxes that are specifically just for clothes. and boxes that are specifically for like home appliances, right? Each of them have a different type of item that you can put inside, and you're not going to mix and match because that would make things really complicated. So each box has an item inside of it. Lastly, each box is a location, right? The variable is the box itself. The contents are not like really of your concern, right? If you grab the action figure box and you give it to your parents, and then they go into the box and they take the Batman out and they put an Iron Man in, right? And they tell you to go put it back up. If you store that box in your storage closet, and the next time they ask you to bring the action figure box out, when you go in the storage closet, you're just going to look for the box that says action figure. You're not going to look for Batman. You're not going to look for Iron Man. You're not going to worry about what the contents are. You're just going to find the box that's labeled action figure, go grab it, and give it to them, right? So, with all that being said, like, why should we use variables? Why do this kind of complicated system of storing everything inside a box, right? Why not just have everything loosely put around the room outside of boxes so you can instantly see what you're looking for? Well, let's imagine that scenario again, but instead of just a storage closet in your house, it's a storage closet in like a toy store, right? And let's say you're an employee at the toy store. And your job is just every 30 minutes, you're going to go and grab the action figure box. You're going to deliver it to your boss. The boss is going to do whatever he wants with it. Either he's going to take the item out and replace it, or he's just going to leave it as is. And then you're going to put that box back where it's supposed to go. It's a really weird job. You're getting paid to do the bare minimum, but it's a great job. That's all you do. You just grab the action figure box, deliver it, bring it back, right? And because your job's so repetitive, maybe you set up a map, right? So that everyone understands where each box is. Imagine that all of these boxes have different labels on them, and yours is right here, right? And so you draw that on the map so that other people understand where your box is just in case they need it. Now, if we were to not store things inside of boxes, not use variables, right? And everything was loose, right? Everything was outside of a box. This can lead to a bit of confusion because let's say you go and grab the Batman figurine because that's what your boss asks you for, right? You go and grab it and you give it to him. But let's say he gives you an Iron Man figurine back. And now you have to go in and store the Iron Man figurine. Now you can either store it where the Batman was, or you can put it in a new place. Either way, you have to then go in and update the map, right? Because the map says Batman. Now you have to erase Batman and write Iron Man. Now, that might be like a kind of inconvenience to you or what you're thinking of, but now imagine your boss. Your boss probably has more than one employee because it's a business. And each of these employees, he's now having to tell specifically to grab a specific item, right? So let's say he tells someone to grab a teddy bear and now he gives them a plush frog instead. He has to remember exactly what he gave to everyone and what is in the storage room to specifically call on it rather than just talking about the variable, right? He has to remember the contents. He has to update the contents, right? And then on the map, everything has to be updated constantly. All of this kind of nitpicky work can be really confusing and lead to a lot of just bad results down the line due to any failure to update and keep things as up to date as possible, right? That is why we use variables. That's one of the many reasons we use variables is just to make things a little bit easier to understand, and so that this confusion is taken out of it, right? With all that being said, let's go and kind of talk about how variables are used within Figma, right? Um, so the first thing that I want to talk about is Boolean variables. And right here, I have a little screen that's titled Boolean Bears. And the way that this works, right, is it utilizes Boolean values. If you are not already aware, Booleans are a value type where the only values that they can hold are either true or false, right? So a Boolean variable can either be set to true or false at any given time. And the way that we use that there are two main ways that we use it. So the first main way that we use it is within a conditional statement. And this goes for every single type of variable, right? We can tell Figma, hey, if this Boolean variable is currently set to true, do something. Otherwise, do something else, right? That is what is called a conditional statement. And that can be done with a Boolean variable. It can be done with all the other types of variables, but most commonly Boolean. The second thing you can do with Boolean variables is assign them to the value of visibility for an item, right? So if you look at my screen and on the right side here, you'll see that in the layer panel, the visibility is tied to this variable here. It's called show panda, right? So what that means is that if show panda is currently true, then you'll be able to see this picture. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the picture, right? And the same goes for each of the other pictures I have set up. This polar bear is set up to be attached to a variable called show polar, and then the grizzly bear is attached to a variable called show grizzly. Um, so that's how they are currently set up. These buttons here, you'll recognize as a show or hide button in a lot of the UI that you use. These buttons have an interaction on them that changes the value of that variable, right? So we're changing what's inside of the box with these buttons. And the way they do that is that within the interaction, they are set to say if show panda is currently true, we're going to set show panda to false. It's kind of hard to see because the UI won't expand, but that's what it does. It just says if it's currently true, we're going to change it to false, and vice versa. If it's currently false, change it to true. So it's just going to toggle between true and false using this button. And what happens when we do that is that if we press this button, the panda is going to go away because it's now set to false. And otherwise, we're going to change it back to true. The same goes for each of these types of bears. Now you'll see at the bottom, I have a show all button and then a hide all button. So the show all button just sets all of these variable values all to true, and regardless of what they currently are. It overrides them and just says you're set to true now. And then the opposite for hide all, it just sets them all to false. So if I have like two of them missing and I click show all, they'll all show up. It doesn't matter how many are missing, how many aren't, they'll all show up if I click show all. The same goes for hide all, right? So that is how Booleans work in Figma. Now we can move on to numbers. And this is going to be a lot of information that we're taking in, and we'll have a break in a second here. But this is numbers. So we're going to have number narwhals. The way that numbers work in Figma is you can also do conditional statements. So you can say, hey, Figma, if my number variable is greater than one, do one action. Otherwise, do something else, right? And so you can do the conditional statements like that. You can also just display the number. Like this piece of text here is a text box I've created in Figma, but the actual value of the text box is tied to the value of the number variable I set up. The number variable is called narwhal. So if you look on the right side of my screen here, the actual content of this text value is set to be directly tied to the narwhal variable. So currently it's 50. You can also do other things like affecting how things look visually, right? So within most items, if you look at them, you can change some of the numbers that you see on the right panel here to be tied to a variable. And specifically, you can change an item's width, you can change its height, you can change its radius based on a variable. If you have auto layout, you can change its padding based on a variable. And that's what I've done here. So this picture here, its width is currently set to be correlated to the number variable called narwhal, right? And then the same for this narwhal down here. It has padding on its left side, and that padding is directly tied to the narwhal variable. You'll see that if I hover over it, it says 50 because the current value of that is 50. Same with this, its width is currently 50 because the value is 50. And then this plus sign and minus sign just do some math on the variable, so they change it. The plus sign will add 10 to the variable, and the minus sign will subtract 10 from the variable. So if we go and look at how that actually works, if we click the plus sign, you'll see that, first of all, the number goes up, right? Secondly, the width of this increases. And then thirdly, the padding next to this narwhal increases, right? And then if we subtract, it does the opposite. And if we go into the negatives, you'll see that the narwhal continues going backwards, but the picture is gone. So it doesn't like open another dimension and do like weird stuff because that's just how Figma set up. But you can go forward and backwards with all of that. Finally, or not finally, next we have strings. This is just a collection of characters that you can type out, right? So they work largely in the same way that numbers do, in that you can display them. So this piece of text is actually just entirely dependent upon a string, right? It's set to this string called string, very creative. Um, and then you can also add or subtract from a string, right? In this case, we're just going to be adding, and we're going to be doing that with each of these small buttons down here. So each of these buttons is set to append a character to the end of this string. Um, and what that means is like if I press on this T button, it'll add T to the end of whatever is in the string. Same with K, same with E, A, S, and N. And then this reset button just sets the entire value of the string to blank, right? It'll still be technically displayed here, but what will be being displayed is going to be blank. That might not make too much sense, but let's see that in action, right? So currently the string is set to hello world. If I add a T, if I add an E, a K, an N, an S, and A, it all just kind of adds to the end of that string. If I reset, it becomes blank. And then with every single type of variable, you can do a conditional statement. So I have it set up to where if I type in the word snake, a picture of a snake pops up. If I add an S to that, it becomes a picture of snakes, right? If I reset and I type in like Ekans, then Ekans, the Pokemon, pops up. So you can do a lot of things with string variables. And then finally, we have color variables. This is pretty simple. We talked about it a bit last week, but basically, you're able to change how a color is appearing based on variables. So this box is set to display the color variable called box, right? And then each of these buttons is set to where when I click on them, they change the value of box to the color that's inside of each of the buttons, right? Um, so that's what that does. I've also included a way to switch between chameleon pictures based on the color that they're set to, but that is using string variables, so I won't really talk about it too much. But anyway, if we go into the prototype, we click different boxes, it'll change the color of the displayed box as necessary. So that is everything you can kind of do with variables, excluding a few things we'll get into here. But this is where the demo will start. So I think Sanjana or Lily will post a link in the chat and you'll have access to our Figma. Um, and so I'll give everyone a few minutes to join that if you're not already on it. And then also while you're doing that, please go and find online uh, 3 pictures of toys that you might have grown up playing with, right? So it can be whatever toys you want. Just find a picture of it online and download it to your system. 3 of those. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and do that. If there's questions, feel free to leave them in chat. I'll try to read them and answer them. Yeah, like Sanjana said, variables are relatively new to Figma, so um, it might be a little bit difficult to latch onto it, especially if you don't come from a coding background. But there are plenty of resources out there to learn and read about variables. If you just go on YouTube and look up like Figma variables, there's tons of creators who have made content. This workshop, in fact, was inspired heavily by one of Figma's creators, this guy named Miggy from Figgy. Um, he does a lot of great content. I drew a lot of inspiration from him to make this workshop. But yeah, hopefully people are able to join the Figma. I see pretty much everyone is on it. Um, in case you don't know how to navigate around Figma, I'm assuming you do, just go to the top left. There's a bunch of pages, and you can come down to the page that says /1 workshop 7 variables. Everyone can go and claim a section like we always do. So just double click on the where it says student, type your name, and then that'll be your section so that you don't have to accidentally um, touch anyone else's resources. So go ahead and do that. And let me make sure we have enough. We should have enough sections. So um, if everyone can go and do that, that would be great. Again, the link is in the chat. And then go and download 3 pictures of toys you might have played with as a child. I'll give everyone a few more minutes to go and do all of that because it is kind of a lot. And like always, if you want to change the fill of your section to some other color so that you can easily distinguish which one's yours, feel free to do that. And if you have any questions about anything I said, anything I was yapping about, feel free to leave that in the chat. Oh, okay. I will wait until 7:28 for everyone to get done. So I'll give it 2 more minutes because see that pretty much everyone's on the Figma, but I don't see that everyone has claimed a box. So I imagine they are looking for pictures of the toys they want to talk about. I should have background music, but I can't play music because it's just like Zoom makes it hard for no reason. So Sanjana will sing for you, is what's going to happen.
I'm just kidding. I can't.
But Sanjana, I thought you were like a pro singer.
No, I do violin. You want me to get it?
You break out the violin and play for 90 seconds. Um,
Find my toys.
I see people are grabbing their toys. Um, looks like a good amount of people are um, getting set up. Uh, so I will wait just a bit more for everyone to get settled in because this will be kind of complicated, and it would be great if you're able to pay attention and not worry about finding your things. Oh, hmm. Looks like there are 25 people in the Figma, including myself and Lily and Sanjana, but there's only like 15 people maybe following along. Kind of strange, but whatever. Whatever, not salty. All right, I'll give it like 1 more minute for everyone to find their toys because I still see people trying to figure that out, and so no worries. I see everyone pasting their toys to their canvas, which is fine. Just make sure those images are also downloaded to your system. So, and we can do that later. You don't have to do it right now, but it'll be easier if they're just downloaded to your computer. All right, I'll give it like 10 more seconds because I see people are finalizing their toy selection. Um, People are asking Sanjana to play the violin, and she's refusing to, and I feel like that's lame.
I'm here to teach, guys.
Teach some violin, Sanjana. All right, so we're gonna move on. I think most people have their toys selected. If not, no worries. I'll give you guys a bit more time later. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. So um, the thing that we're going to be building today is going to be branching off of that toy store I was talking about earlier. Let's imagine that we want to create a way for people to buy toys just on their phone. So how do we do that, right? If you come up here to the top of the page, or you just look at what I'm sharing on my screen, you'll see this like little section called thinking. And basically, what we're going to have available for people to use is a menu where they can browse through different toy options. They're going to have an ability to add or remove those items from their cart, and then they're going to have an ability to view their cart. And in the cart, they'll see like their selected items and how many of each item. They'll see the total amount of items and then the calculated price. And if they add or remove items from the cart, then everything should respond accordingly, right? So, with that in mind, and it's up here on the top of the page in case anyone ever needs to refer to it later on, how do we actually go about doing that? Well, I've provided some components on each of your student sections. So if you look at the left side of your student section, there are some items and there's like a bunch of scribbles all over them. Let's go over that right now. So the top item, the biggest one, is going to be how people view different types of toys in the menu, right? So um, that's going to be that. And then the smaller one that's below it is going to be how people view those items in their cart because they'll need less information, right? And then I've labeled everything. So each of these will have a way for you to view how many are in your cart currently. Each of them will have an image of the item. Each of them will display the item's name, and then each of them will display the item's price, right? And then for the card that will be in the menu, you'll be able to remove or add items to your cart. And then, yeah. So, how do we actually set all of that up? Well, we are going to go and start working on variables. So, just in case you weren't here last week, the way we work on variables is we click on the canvas, just a blank space on the canvas, so that we're back to our main design panel. Um, and then we will go and look at the little tab that says local variables. Next to the word local variables is an option to open your variables. So we're going to all open up our variables. Why is mine over here? Not sure. Okay, so we have our variable menu open. Hopefully, everyone understood how to do that. Now, you'll see that it probably pre-populated with like a bunch of someone else's variables. So don't worry about that right now. Um, that will not be useful for what we're doing. And if you were here last week, you probably have your own section already. That doesn't matter. We're going to make a new collection regardless. So if everyone can click the ellipses next to that drop down that's in the top left of your variable menu, it says more options. Click that ellipses and then just click on create collection. And each of us are going to create a collection called our first name, and then we're going to call it menu. So in my case, Dylan menu. Everyone create their own collection, please. And once you do that, you should see that your collection is blank. There shouldn't be any variables in there. If there still are variables in there, you're probably in the wrong collection. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. And if you have any questions about how to do that, please leave it in the chat. I can re-explain it if necessary. So I see most people have created their own menu. Some people have created a collection but have not renamed it yet. So make sure you rename it because that will help you navigate through all of these different collections. And I can tell you guys right now, there will probably be a bit of confusion in trying to find variables that are in your collection. That will not be the typical experience. You know, you're not typically working with like 20 other people who all have their own collections. Usually collections are shared and they're divvied up based on like necessity and what you need to use for specific purposes. Um, so this will be a bit more bit more confusing than most things you'll ever encounter. All right, so now that we have created our own little collection called your first name menu, we're going to look at the component that we were just explaining earlier, and we're going to see what variables we need to implement in order to make all of this work, right? So the first one we're going to create, and you can just create a variable by clicking create variable, super self-explanatory. The first thing we're going to do is create a name, right? And in order to make a name, we need to use a string variable. So we're going to click on create string variable. And this is going to be the name of each of your toys. So in the first column, that's going to be like the name of the actual variable. In this case, we're going to just call it toy, right? And then we are not going to mess with the actual value yet. The second variable we're going to create is the toy's price. So in order to do that, we're going to click create variable at the bottom of the menu, and we're going to click on number. and we're going to call this toy price. The next thing we need to do is we need to have a way to indicate how many of this toy are currently in our cart, right? So again, this is going to be a number value. So we're going to go create variable, choose number, and we're going to name this one um, toys selected. And all these variable names like don't necessarily matter. Like you can name them your own things if you want. I will be referring to them as how I've named them. So if it makes it easier for you to name them the same thing as me, that is great. If not, just remember what you named each variable. And then the last thing we'll do for now is we're going to create one more variable. Just kidding. We're going to create two more variables. We're going to have one called, we're going to create one variable that is a Boolean, and it's going to be, um, it's going to be called item selected. So that is a Boolean variable called item selected. This will be an indication as to whether or not this specific toy has been added to your cart, and you'll see why we need that later. And then the last thing we'll do is create a color variable. And this color variable is going to be the default picture that um, is displayed in each of your cards as you're working on it, because we're not going to add pictures just yet. We'll add them at the end. So we'll call it item picture. So now you should have 5 variables in your collection. And if you remember from last week, or if you weren't here last week, we can add multiple modes to all of these variables, right? So we can change the actual value of the variable based on its context and mode. So we can do that by clicking the plus sign that is in the first row next to the word value. We are going to click that, and we're going to click it again to make 3 modes, because you have 3 toys, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to name each of our modes based on our toys. So the first mode, in my case, I'm going to put like figure, because I have like a figurine. The second one, I'm going to name plushie. And then the third one, I'm going to name Lego. And again, these you should name it based on your toys so that you're not confused. And then for each of these, so for each of these modes, we're going to also give the actual toy name string variable. So the first like variable you set up, we're going to also name those based on the toys names. So I'm going to use the same words. You don't have to use the same words. You can be more specific if you want. But I'm going to call each of them figure, plushie, and Lego. And if I'm going too fast or anything, just type it in the chat, and Lily or Sanjana will yell at me, and I will go slower. So once you have that first string variable set up, we're going to move on to the toy price variable, right? So go ahead and give each of your toys a price. I'm going to say like a figurine is like, I don't know, like $9.99. I'm going to say the plushie is like $8.50. And then the Legos are going to be like $14.99. Arbitrary price, doesn't really matter. Set it to whatever you want. For toy selected, we're going to keep that at 0 right now, because our default should be 0, because the user has to actually make the choice to select the toys before we increase that or decrease that quantity. Same thing with items selected, right? Because they haven't chosen an item yet, so we keep that as false. And then for the item picture, just choose whatever color you want for each of these modes to correspond with your toy, or however you're feeling, just based on vibes, I guess. So choose a few different colors, just so that you can very easily distinguish which toy you're referring to, because there won't be pictures. So this will be an easy way to make sure you're working on the right things. All right. So hopefully everyone has their 5 variables entirely set up with 3 different modes. I'm going to go and look through and see if that is true, and see if I'm moving too fast or not. It looks like most people are doing pretty decently. They're getting through what is necessary. All right. So I'll give it a little bit more time, but we will be continuing here shortly. All right. Okay. So once you have all of that set up, you'll notice that I've set it up to where you have your components over here, and then you have implemented components on um, the right side of your screen, right? So you have like actual screens that are set up that implement the components we've been playing with. The first thing we're going to do is kind of assign each of those variables to the values that are in the components, right? So the way we do that is we're going to click on each of the things that we want to replace, and we're just going to attach them to the variable. So the easiest way to do this is to hold Control or Command on Mac, and we're going to hover over what we want to replace. So in this case, the item name is going to be the first one I do. So I'm going to click on it once. I'm just selected item name, and I'm going to come over to the right side menu, and under text, there is like a hexagon on the right side, a hexagon with like a dot in it. And if you hover over it, it says apply variable. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to scroll down to where it says Dylan menu, right? In your case, it should be, your first name menu. And I'm going to choose toy, because that is what I have set as the name of each item. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do the same exact thing for the item name, but in the smaller component. So I'm just going to assign it as toy. That's within Dylan menu. And again, this can be kind of confusing because there's going to be a whole lot of variables that are named exactly the same thing, but they're not necessarily going to be yours. So just make sure that you're finding the ones that are in your collection. Someone said again, please. So we're going to select the thing that we want to replace. We're going to come to the right side of our screen, and under the text panel, there is a hexagon with a dot in it. And if you hover over it, it says apply variable. If you click on that, you can choose from the menu, and you should just find the the variables that are under your menu, the ones that say like first name menu, and just choose the one that you called toy or whatever you assigned as the variable name. Now we're going to do the same thing for a bunch of other. Yes, if you, Sanjana said if you give your variables a specific name, you can also search for them instead of scrolling. So if you really want to go back and change all that, you could. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the prices of everything. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to control and click on my price here. I'm going to click on this apply variable button. I'm going to go down to my collection, and I'm going to choose toy price. I'm going to do the same thing for the smaller component. Toy price. Let's see how y'all are doing. Looks like some of y'all got it. And again, if you hold Control before you click, you're able to choose the most atomized items. So you don't have to like continue to double click throughout the rest of the component, because that can be confusing. So just hold Control or Command on Mac. So it looks like a lot of us have it. Not all of us, so I'll give it a bit more time. But yeah. And then everything else we're going to be doing for this portion of the class is going to be very similar. So um, we're just going to be assigning variables to different values that we see on our component. Can we go over what to set for each variable again, if possible? Yes. So the first one, if you see my screen or just look at your screen, I think it says item name is the default value for it or something like that. If you click on that, we're going to change that to the name of our toy. So in my case, I just named that variable toy. That was probably not specific enough, but that is what we're going to be assigning to that. And then under it, there's like a dollar sign and then a price. So very self-explanatory. That is going to be set as your toy price. Um, I think that should be uh, like that should make sense for most people, and they probably have the information. They just need to go ahead and do it. I'm going to move on, but please do let me know if you need additional help. We're going to change the quantity, right? So um, I'm going to highlight this 0, specifically just the 0, because this is all formatted. So just the 0 here. Don't click on the X, right? And the top left of your top component. Um, so just the 0, that is going to be the quantity of how many of this item you have in your cart. So if I come over and apply a variable, I'm going to choose the variable called uh, toys selected. And I'm going to do the same thing for the smaller component, right? I think that should be self-explanatory, but if not, please do let me know and I'll try to explain it again. Again, I am choosing the variable I have titled toys selected because that's my quantity. I am now realizing that my names for all the variables were not very great. So I would encourage you in the future, if you are doing this on your own, to be more specific about your variable names. Yes, Sanjana said, make sure you're not selecting that you are just selecting the number, not the X. So you can, again, do that just by holding Control or Command on your keyboard and then clicking on the actual number 0. It should build like a small little box around it, and that way you'll know that you're actually selecting just a 0. I'll give everyone a bit of time to do that. Mhm. And I think most people have it all set up. So I'll give it like 10 more seconds and then we can move on. Again, if I'm moving too fast, just mention it in the chat and I'll go back and re-explain whatever is necessary. So now we have everything set up for just how we're interact. Oh, we have one more thing. Sorry. Um, the images, right? So we have the little color variables that we set up earlier. All you have to do is hold Control, click on each of the gray boxes where the images are supposed to be. If you move on over to the right side panel, there's the word fill. We've done this a few times, but you'll click on the 4 little squares that are in like a square shape. If you hover over it, it says styles and variables. If you click on that, there should be an option for you to choose from your first name menu. So you can do that with both of your rectangles. And you might be noticing that you're only getting options for one of your toys, right? Like you might think, oh, I set up 3 toys. Why am I only getting options from one of them? That is because by default, each of these items will go to the first mode that you have. And then once you create duplicates, you're able to change the mode and they'll respond accordingly. Can I go over the color part again? Yes. So within your 2 components, you have gray rectangles set up. If you hold Control and click on them, you can choose a different fill. And we can choose using the 4 squares that are next to the word fill. And if you click on that, you should be able to scroll down and find the color that you have set up in your variables. All right. So let's see. I think most people have it set up. Yeah. Okay. So now we have set up everything we need for just the menu, right? So um, the actual we set up everything we need for the cards here, right? You'll see that we have a few more things down below the cards. We have a few more components. We have one that says totals and one that says view cart button. So now we need to set up variables for those things, right? Um, Specifically, we need to set up a variable that contains the number of how many total items we are putting in our cart, a variable that contains the total price of our items, and then a variable that, again, contains total items. Right, so if we go back into our local variables, um, you'll notice that since you have three modes here, um, trying to add something that totals all of your three modes doesn't really work, right? And if that description didn't make sense, um, apologies. So like if I'm trying to set up a variable for total price and I added a number variable to my current collection, it would be segmented into three different modes, right? But we don't want that. We just have really like one mode, and that's to add all of these values, right? And so because of that, we have to make a new collection. Again, it'll be very hectic right now, but that will not be the case when you're working on it by yourself or within a team because things will be segmented based on purpose. But for the purposes of today, it'll be a little confusing. So we're going to go ahead and create a new collection, right? Do the same thing, click on the ellipses and click on create collection. This one we're going to name your first name and then cart. So it's different from your first name menu. Name it your first name cart. And again, you should see a blank collection. If you see any variables that are already in there, you're probably in the wrong place. Um, I think most people have their cart set up. Some people are still naming it, which is fine. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. So what do we do now? We're going to create a few more variables. The first one we're going to create is going to be called total cost. So we're going to create a variable, and this is going to represent the total like amalgamated cost of all the items in your cart. And because of that, it's going to be a number variable. I'm going to call it total cost. And that's going to be set to 0 right now. The second variable we're going to set up is going to be called items in cart. Or you can set total items. I think that might be easier. Total items. That's also going to be a number variable, right? This is going to keep track of how many total items are in our cart. The last variable we're going to set up is going to be a Boolean. This is going to be called cart has items. So this Boolean value is going to represent whether or not our cart is empty, right? So like if it has 0 items in it, then this Boolean value will be set to 0. Otherwise, it will be set to true. So you should have 3 new variables. 2 of them are numbers for total cost and total items. The last one is a Boolean value called cart has items, or whatever you'd like to name it. Again, if you name it something specific, it'll be easier to search up. But hopefully everyone has that set up. I can actually go in and see how people are doing on that. So again, you'll have 2 number variables and then 1 Boolean variable. Looks like most people are doing fine. So we will move on. And again, this class is going to take a bit more time than typical classes just because this is a pretty complex topic. So we can go in and assign those variables to our remaining components, right? So this first component is called totals. We are going to assign, um, we're going to assign the first variable to this total items. Be all right, okay, there's my stuff. So total items, you can assign it there. Um, the second thing you'll be doing um, is you're going to choose the item that says total price, right? So the entry that says total price. You're going to make sure to choose a 0 there, and then you are going to go and find the associated variable. It's called total cost, right? I need to go find mine. Oh my gosh. Again, this is as confusing as it'll ever be because this is not a very realistic setup for everyone else. Total cost, right? And then lastly, we have our component all the way at the bottom. It's called the view cart button. Um, we're going to tell it how many items we have in our cart at any given moment. So we're going to assign to the 0 there. We're going to assign that to total items again. So the same variable we used earlier. If we can go and find that. Total items. Hopefully everyone has been able to do that. You might still be scrolling through the seemingly endless amount of variables, but if you get confused, just kind of look at the names of each of the things, and you should be able to put two and two together and figure out which variable you need. If you are not able to, just leave a comment in the chat, and I will try to get to it. Okay. Now we are going to add some functionality to this plus and minus sign, right? We're almost done. We're actually so close. The last thing we need to do is just add a way for them to be able uh, to add items to their cart or subtract items from their cart, right? So the way we do that is we're going to go into our prototyping mode, and we're going to click on the plus sign, right? Um, you might have to click on it a few times to get to just selecting the plus sign. And you'll do this in your component page, right? So we click on the plus sign, and we are going to we're going to add an interaction. So you can do that just by clicking the plus sign at the top right of your screen next to the word interactions. We're going to add an interaction, and it's going to be on click because that's how we are going to interact with the plus sign. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to update the number of items that are number of this item that are in our cart, right? Um, so the way we do that is we set it to set variable. We're going to be changing a variable. That's what set variable means. So we're going to choose set variable, and our target variable is going to be we're going to look for our oh my gosh, there are so many things. We're going to be looking for an item in our menu called toys selected. So look for that in your menu. There might be a bit confusing to look through, but there should be a variable within your collection called your first name menu, and it's called toys selected. You can also just like look up toys selected and try to find the one that's in your collection. And then once you click on that, it'll ask you what you want to change that to. So we're going to, again, choose toys selected in your collection, but then we're going to do +1. So in short, we're setting that, we're changing a variable. The variable we're changing is called toys selected, and it's going to become toys selected +1. So that is the first thing that's going to happen when we click on the plus sign. The second thing we're going to do is um, the second thing we're going to do is we're going to change another variable. So we're going to add another interaction just by clicking the plus sign that's in the menu you already have up. We're going to do another set variable. And this time we're going to change um, a variable called item selected, right? So this is a variable. It's a Boolean variable that's currently set to false. That's default set to false, and we're going to change that to true because what's happening is when we click on the plus button, it adds an item to our cart, and that also means that we've selected this item to buy, right? Yes, there is math equations. This is the coding part that everyone hates, but it is kind of fun if you are not doing it in such a convoluted menu. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to have it, hold on here. We are going to uh, change the actual price, the total price of everything, right? So once we add an item to our cart, we need to update our total items and our total price. We've already updated our quantity of everything, right? And we've changed a Boolean. We need to now update the total items and total price. So we are going to add another interaction to the same, we're going to add another step to the same interaction. And we are going to set the variable that we have called uh, total items. So if you just look up total items, you should be able to scroll through everything a little bit easier and find your specific version of that. We're going to change total items. And now we're going to write a math equation, which is probably not what you signed up for, but too bad. The way we're going to do that is we're going to change it to quantity, or I guess we named it toys selected. So go choose toys selected from your menu. And then we're going to click the back arrow on your keyboard in order to kind of highlight toys selected. And using that, we can go into modes. So we can choose a specific mode. For the first one, we're going to choose figure, right? So basically, we're saying how many figurines are selected or whatever your first toy is, right? And then we're going to do a plus sign, so addition. And we're also going to do toys selected. Find your version of that. Again, apologies if this is kind of confusing. There's a lot of variables out there. And if you really need to, you can always watch this back and try to follow along there. So the second toy selected, we're going to choose the mode, our second toy. So in my case, plushie. And then we're going to do that one more time. Toys selected, find mine, and then click the back arrow to highlight it, and then choose my last toy, so Lego. So in short, I am changing the number of my total items to the addition of all my different toys that I've selected. hopefully you're able to follow along. I understand it could be very confusing. Um, and then we're going to do one more interaction here. We're going to update the total price, right? And it's going to be a very similar process. We're going to do set variable. We're going to add another set variable to all this. We're going to look up total price. Or total cost, I believe is what I called it. So we're going to look at total cost, and we're going to change that to item price. So each of the prices of your items, so toy price, sorry. We're going to change it to toy price. We're going to go back on this in order to choose a specific mode. The first one I'm going to choose is figure. So I have my toy price for my first toy. And now I'm going to do multiplication because we need to multiply our price by the quantity of that toy we have in our cart, right? So we're going to multiply that by toys selected. And we're going to also go back on that in order to change the mode to the appropriate toy. Once we do that, we're going to do an addition, and we're going to do that same process for both of our other toys. So we should have toy price times toys selected for each of our different modes. So toy price. And we're going to go back to change it to the plushie mode. And we're going to do times toys selected. We're going to go back to change that into plushie mode. And then lastly, we're going to do addition, toys, toy price. Change that into the last mode I have, and then multiply it by the toys selected, and then change that to my final mode. Not a super complicated equation if you just kind of write it out or think it through, but kind of complicated to set all of that up given the constraints of our variables right now. So that will update your total cost, right? So with a single click of the plus button, we're able to adjust the quantity of how many toys of this type we've selected. We're able to tell Figma that we have indeed selected at least one item. We're able to change the total items that are in our cart and then change the total cost of our cart or the total price, right? And if you want, you can go and you can view the first frame that I've set up for you guys. You can view that as a prototype if you just add a starting point to the flow. You can really quickly view it, and then you can add. You can click the plus sign and see if it does what it's supposed to. So it'll update the quantity at the top of your screen and the bottom of your screen. That's what it should do. And then if we want to check if it's correctly updating the total price with the right math, we can go to our two screens that we have set up here. We can set up a quick prototype. So we can click on the view cart button down here, drag an interaction over to, I don't know what's happening here. Let's see. We can drag an interaction over to, maybe you might have to take those two things out of your section. So if that's not working, you might not have to. I don't know if it's just on my end or not. But you can add an interaction to, okay, I don't know what that just, okay, so sorry, you're going to add an interaction to your view cart button, and it's going to lead to your cart page. And you can set up whatever type of transition you want. I'm going to do a move in, and then I'm going to do the same thing, but in reverse. So I'm going to click on the back button and add an interaction to go back to the menu page, and I'm going to have it move out. So now if I view my little prototype, I should be able to click the view cart button, and it'll take me to the cart page. If I click the back button, it'll take me back. If I add, not really sure what's happening here. Okay, so if I bring these back in, um, okay, so I don't know how my interaction just got deleted, but uh, okay, we'll just move on. Okay, it's back. I don't know what happened there. Cool. Um, so if I go into my flow, I should be able to add items to my cart. And if I click on my cart, I should see the total cost of the items. I don't know if someone is accidentally clicking on um, my prototyping, and maybe they're accidentally setting up as theirs, but just make sure you're working in your own section. All right. Sorry for any confusion that might have caused it. If you have questions about anything I just said, please do leave it in the chat. I will try to answer how that works. All right. So we have our plus button set up. Now we need to address our minus button. And the way we're going to start that is the same as we did with our plus button. So we are going to add an interaction to the minus button. What do we do after making the equation? After you made those 4 different interactions, right? That means that anytime you press the plus button in your prototype, it should change all of those variables accordingly. You can go and add some prototyping to your 2 screens that I've set up so that you can navigate between the menu and the cart page. And I explained that a little bit earlier. So, and it should be pretty basic. You can add any sort of interaction between them. All right, so back to the minus button. If we add an interaction to the minus button, we're going to add an interaction. So now it says on tap. That's what we want because we're going to be interacting with it using tap. We're going to set a variable. Actually, we're going to do a conditional because we need to verify that things are not negative, right? So we need to make sure that the number of items here does not go into the negatives because that doesn't make any sense. We cannot buy negative items. And I understand that this class has been long and kind of confusing. So please do come to our Q&A session if you have any questions about what we've gone over. And again, you can always watch this class back and try to follow along if you are unable to right now. So we're going to add a conditional. The first condition is going to be making sure that we do not have negative of this item in our cart. So we're going to call it if toys selected is greater than 0. So we need to make sure that it's greater than 0 to continue our action of subtracting 1, right? If it's greater than 0, we're going to add an action. We're going to set the variable toys selected to toys selected to toys selected -1. Um, Otherwise, we're just going to set the variable called toy selected to 0 because we don't need to do anything in that case. Set variable toys selected to 0. All right, so that is the first conditional that we have set up. The second one we're going to do is in order to um, tell tell Figma that we don't have any of this item selected if it is 0, right? So within the else part of this conditional, and if you guys need to drop off, feel free to. I will continue this recording and then you can watch it again later. Within the else part of this conditional, we're going to add another interaction. So we're going to add a nested action, and that is going to be to set a variable, and we are going to set um, the variable called uh, toys selected, or sorry, that is not the actual right variable. We're going to choose we are going to choose item selected, and we're going to set that to false. Because if the quantity of that toy is 0, we need to tell Figma that we have selected none of that item, right? Right. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to make another. We're going to do very similar things to what we just did earlier. So we are going to update the cost and the number of items we have in our cart. Um, and so we are going to add a we're going to add a set variable. It is going to be the same equations that we did earlier. I believe you're able to copy and paste them. So I'm going to try and grab those here um, because it would be a lot of work to retype all of that. Um, so I'm going to go in and choose this equation. I'm going to copy it for the total items I have. And I'm going to um, add that interaction to my minus sign, set variable total items, find my version of that, and then paste my equation. I'm going to do the same thing for total price. Go here, choose my equation, copy it, and then I'm going to add an interaction set variable to total price or total cost is what I called it. And then paste that equation. So now we have pretty much all of our things done. We have one or two more interactions that we can do. The first one of which is just kind of telling, all right, let's kind of think about which variables we need to continue to update. So I'm going to go and look at my local variables, look at my menu. So I've gone ahead and I don't ever need to update the name of my variables or the name of my items. I don't need to update the price. The toy selected is already updated each time I add or subtract toys. The items selected is also updated, right? So that's all good and handy. If I go into my cart, the total cost of the items is updated each time I add or subtract. The total items is also updated each time I add or subtract. And then cart has items. I believe is the last interaction we need to add to our subtract button. So we're going to come here, go back to our interaction, and we are going to do one more thing. We're going to add a conditional, and we're going to see if the total items, we're going to see if it's equal to 0. We're going to see if total items is equal to 0, then we're going to change, we're going to set the variable called um, uh, cart has items. We're going to change that variable to false. And that should be, and then we can say else, set that variable to true. Cart has items. We set that to true. I hope at least some of y'all are able to follow along. Again, this is pretty confusing, but thank you for sticking around and trying to figure it out with me. All right, so with all that being said, our functionality should pretty much all work. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add multiple versions of our little menus to the screen so that I can test and see make sure everything works. So I'm just going to click on the component that's in my menu page. I'm just going to click on that and then type Control D to duplicate it. So I'm duplicating it twice. And each of these versions I'm going to set to a different mode. So if you remember from last week, we just click on the actual component that we want to change modes of. And then we go to the right side. Next to the layer tab, there's like two hexagons on top of each other. You can choose change variable mode. And then you can choose your second toy for the second one. And then your third toy for the third one. And then, all right. So that should work. I'm going to preview it and make sure I'm able to add items and making sure that each of the variables is updating correctly. And it looks like they are. I'm not going into the negatives, which is good. And it looks like the total items is updating every time I change. So if I go to view cart, it looks like I have a total price that seems updated. Let me subtract and see if it still, oh, that might not be right. Oh, no, okay, it is right. So if you're able to follow along with all of that, you should be in a place where things make sense. If not, no worries. You can always watch this again later. Um, the last thing we're going to do, just for this course, is we're going to insert our images. So we are going to go into insert and place image, and we're going to grab those 3 images that we downloaded all the way back when, and we're going to insert those into our menu. We're going to add each item, and we can do that just by clicking on the rectangle that you have filled in color, and you can adjust those as necessary. Oh, and then one more thing. Sorry. After you do that, you can select all 3 of your card items that are in your menu, and you can copy them, and then you can just click on your cart page, and then click on the auto layout item that's in there. You might not just click on it until you're selecting like the bottom half of the page ish, and you just click paste. And then as I have the 3 of these selected, I can click the up arrow and it'll go above the little chip that tells me my totals. And then all of these, I'm going to select them and then change them from their
Dylan,
current state. Yes.
sorry, quickly once you're done, there's a question in the chat about setting the names. for the cart items not be the mode of
Oh,
variable?
okay. So, yes. So in order to change each of the cart items to a different mode, you just click on the cart item and you can go on the right side of your page. There's a layer panel. Next to the word layer are like two hexagons. If you just click on that, you should be able to choose a different type of toy. And I think that should answer your question. Um, but going back to your okay, cool. Going back to your cart page, if you select those three, you should change the state because these are variants of a component, right? If you look at how it's structured, you can change the state from choose to in cart, and that will shrink them and make it all pretty. And that'll be like kind of the last thing we do because I have taken enough of your time already. So yeah, again, just copy and paste those three items over to your cart page. You can click the up arrow after you've pasted them to make them go above the chip there, and then just um, change their state from choose to in cart, and then you can apply the pictures that you have as necessary. I'm going to go and see how my prototype looks. So it looks like everything I want it to look like. I can add items. Looks like the variables are updating accordingly. I can go into view cart. It looks like they're all updated, and it looks like my total price and total items is correct. So if you're able to follow along, I hope you have a really cool thing to look at. If not, no worries. Again, you can always go back and rewatch this video. But I see a lot of people are in a good spot, and that is great to see. Um, if any of it was confusing, no worries. We are going to post this on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch at your heart's content. With all that being said, that'll be the last thing I teach. I'll be sticking around for any questions in case you guys are still confused about how to continue. I'll be answering that. But for the video, that is it. Thank you. So, the class we just had was a little bit hectic just because of how many people were working with variables and how unspecific some of my naming conventions were for my variables. So, I wanted to hop on and quickly just kind of go through the final product just in case you are watching the YouTube playback and it's still kind of confusing, which I would completely understand. So, just for context, I actually went back and I adjusted some of my variable names just so that things are making more sense for anyone who's watching this, right? So the first one is I changed the name of my toys, right? So figure, plushie, Lego, those are going to be called toy name to be more specific. My second one is still called toy price, which indicates the price of each individual type of toy. Um, I changed this from, I think, toys selected or something like that to toys in cart. This is more specific. This is the quantity of this specific toy and how many are currently in the cart. Items selected, I've kept. This just means whether or not this specific toy has been added to the cart. And then item picture is the same. And then we have our cart items. I changed it from total cost to total price just to match the item right here. It says total price already, so I just changed it to that. And then total items is how many total items are in the cart. Total price, again, was how much the entire cart costed. And then cart has items just indicates whether or not there are any items within the cart, just in case I did not explain that clearly earlier. So those are my variables. I wanted to go back and show you guys the final um, set of conditions and interactions I had set up, just so that you guys can view them and kind of make sure that what you have is aligned with this. So if I go to prototype for my plus button, if I click this here, and if I expand all of these, so the first thing I have is a set variable. So this is very basic. It just changes the number of toys in cart to toys in cart plus one. So specifically, that would be this quantity right here or this quantity right here. That is the quantity of this specific toy in the cart. The second thing it does is that it sets item selected to true. So that means that this toy item, so specifically here figure, there is a figure selected and in the cart, at least one, right? Um, the next one is total items, and I changed that to this really long equation, not super long actually. Um, the total items in my cart is equal to the total number of figures I have, the total number of plushies I have, and the total number of Legos I have, all added together. And when you're typing in the variable, you would type in toys in cart or whatever yours is called. I believe it's called toys selected, which was a bad name on my part. And you would just click on that variable, or you could just well after you type it, you could do the back arrow and it would highlight it, or you just click on it, and then you can come down here to the modes and then just click on the proper toy type. Right. Make sure you have all three of those added together. So that again, that just tells you how many total items are in your cart, and you do that by adding the number of each toy together. The fourth thing is the same type of idea, but with the total price. So this is a bit of a longer equation, but in short, it is the price of your figure or the price of your first toy times the number of the first toy that are in your cart plus the price of your second toy times the number of the second toy that are in your cart, plus the price of your third toy times the number of the third toy in the cart, right? Pretty basic function. And it sets the total price to that value. And the last thing that is in the addition is um, every time you add something, you set the Boolean variable called cart has items to true, because if you're adding something, then obviously there will be something in the cart, at least something. So that is it for the addition interactions. I will probably send out a picture of all of this just to make sure that you guys have it all uh, available to you. Now for subtraction, I know this is where a lot of people kind of got lost. Um, let's go over that. So the first thing I have is a conditional statement that says if um, the quantity of this toy in the cart is greater than zero, right? So to explain that, like it wouldn't make sense to subtract this number if the number of this toy in your cart is zero or less than zero, right? You can't go into the negatives. You're not going to sell toys to the store. So if that is true, so if this number is one or more, then we set the number of toys in the cart. So we set this quantity number to itself, but minus one, right? So we basically just subtract one from this quantity if the quantity is higher than one. Otherwise, we set the quantity to zero, right? Because if the quantity is already zero, or if it's already zero, we just set it back to zero. We don't want to do anything really. We just do that as a safety precaution. The second conditional is checking to see if this quantity is now zero, right? Because these steps they execute sequentially. So it first does this check and it sees what the situation is and it executes this specific function or whichever one would apply, and then it checks again. So it checks to see if toys in cart equals zero. Then we set the item selected to false, right? So if there are none of the, if you haven't added a figure to your cart, then we understand that the number of figures in your cart is equal to zero. And so you haven't selected it, right? And then we can go into the third one, which is set variable of total items to that equation that we did earlier. So it's the same thing that we had on the addition. I just went into the equation, I highlighted it I copied it, so Control C, and I came into here, which is the subtraction functions, and I just pasted it down here. You don't have to retype all of it. And then the same thing goes for the price. So I set the total price to that function we established earlier. And then the last thing I did was I set if total items is equal to 0, then so this is all of the items in your cart. If the newly calculated total item total in your cart is 0, then I set cart has items to false, right? Because I want to check and make sure to see if there are any items in the cart, and if there aren't any, I set item cart has items to false. Otherwise, I set it to true, right? And that's again just a safety thing. Um, and we didn't really go over why I have some of those Boolean variables implemented during the class, but I am here to now explain. So um, let's kind of view how it currently works with all of that without implementing the Booleans, right? So if I go into my prototype here, you'll see that I have my 3 different types of toys. So I have a figure, a plushie, and a Lego kit. If I add to them this view cart total items down here, that's updating accordingly, right? If I add, and if I view the cart, it shows me how many of each item I have, right? And it shows me the total price, and that's that's being updated every single time I press a button. Now, if I want to polish this up a little bit more, I want it to, let's say, I want it so that if I get to 0, right, I don't want to see this minus sign because it doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't ever subtract from 0. So I can do that with a Boolean variable that I set up already. The same goes for this quantity sign, right? If none of them are selected, most people probably don't care to see a 0 up here. And then finally, if there aren't any items in my cart, I don't really have any reason to have this pop up, right? I can't view my cart if it's empty. I mean, sometimes you can, but let's say for this specific instance, I don't want it. And then when I'm actually in the cart, maybe I don't want to actually see any items that I haven't added, right? It wouldn't really make sense to come into the cart and then see that you have 0 of X item, right? It probably just shouldn't be in your cart. So let's go and figure out how to do that in Figma. This is going to be really, really brief, but it's just something we didn't get to during class. So the first bit is this quantity sign, right? I don't want to see the quantity if the quantity is 0. And the way I do that is I click on just the quantity sign. So you'll see that on the left side here, I'm selecting just this little item here. If I go into my design tab and I go down to my layer, no, not layer, sorry. If I go to my fill, not fill, what am I looking for? I'm looking for layer. Okay. If I go to here on the layer, there's like a show/hide icon, right? If I click on that, it hides the whole thing. If I right click on that, I can assign that to a Boolean variable. I showed you guys how to do this earlier in the class, but in this case, I'm going to go and find my menu item that's called item selected, and I attach it to that. So by default, item selected is set to false because the default value for the quantity is 0. And so I attached those two. So now that will only pop up if the quantity of that item in my cart is more than 1. I'm going to do the same thing, the exact same thing to this minus sign, right? Because I shouldn't be able to minus unless there is at least 1 item in the cart. So I come over to my layer tab, I right click on the eye icon, and I choose the same exact Boolean variable I was working with earlier, item selected from my menu, right? And since I'm doing that in the component, the parent component, within all the children component or all the instances of that component, you'll see that those changes are reflected. And then now I want this view cart button to not exist if I don't have anything in my cart. I could do the same exact thing. So I just click on that view cart button. I come over to the layer panel, right click on the eye icon. But in this case, I'm not going to do item selected because um, this does not consider which specific item is being selected or not selected. It's looking at the cart as a whole, right? And so I'm going to scroll down, or I can just look up cart because the variable name I have is called cart has items. I'm looking for mine in Dylan cart. So cart has items. I'm going to attach that to that variable. And again, it is default set to false. So that disappears from my view right now. If I am for some reason wanting to work with these things after I like attach them to that variable, I can always go into my variables and, for instance, if I wanted to see that view cart button again, I can just set it to true by default, or I set it back to false. Same goes for the same goes for the minus sign and the quantity up here. I can change this default to true, um, and you'll notice that if I change this boolean value, it only shows up for figure because that's the mode it's in. If I change it for plushie, it'll come back. Um, so that's that. And then the last thing, I want these to only appear in the stack if there's more than one of them, or at least one of them. Um, and then I do the same thing. So I just go find this item, go to the layer panel, right click on it, and I'm going to look for item selected, right? And because it's by default, it's not there, it'll disappear. Um, and you'll remember that each of these are in a different mode. So it'll look for the variable value of item selected before its specific mode. So that's why these two like didn't disappear. So again, we'll go to the layer panel, right click on there, look for item selected. And then for the last one, layer panel, look for item selected. And then with that, if I go back into prototype, right, you can see here that I don't have the view item or the view cart button. And if I add things, now I do have a view cart button. I also added the quantity button and the minus sign, so I can subtract. And if I add here and subtract from here, those disappear, but the view cart button stays. And then let's say I go view the cart. I only have plushies in my cart, so that's the only thing that populates. If I add a figure, I can view the cart, figures in the cart, and now if I add a Lego set, now the Lego's in the cart. So hopefully this extra bit of kind of recap helps any of you guys who are following along or might have gotten lost. Um, and that additional bit of kind of functionality makes sense to you guys. Again, I will share kind of a breakdown of the final interactions along with our recap, just in case you guys want to see it. But watching this video is probably the best option. But yeah, thank you everyone for following along. Apologies if it was a bit convoluted. I kind of saw the mess with looking at everyone's variables going into it, but I didn't think it would be that bad. And I also kind of named my variables in a poor manner. So yeah, thank you for following along with the workshop series in general. Really appreciate everyone's participation and hope to see you guys next week.